The idea is now. Is this on?
On the bottom.
Excuse me?
Switch is on the bottom.
Okay. There we are.
Okay. So I think the idea is now that we're going to have this simple fireside chat. And I think what it does is gives me the opportunity to kind of warm up the audience with some further questions that I'll start with, and some elaboration and questions on some prior issues and topics that CK has addressed in the past in other books or in interviews and so on. And to give you a flavor not only of the man himself and the way he thinks, but also perhaps to relate it more to entrepreneurial experiences. The book is, I've read the book, it's on the table there in my Kindle. I downloaded it in about 3 seconds, and it's fascinating. And indeed, it's all about the personalization of co-created experiences, but using global resources to bear to bring those to the consumer, to the individual. And I think the Apple iPhone is a wonderful example of that, which he obviously elaborated on. I would have thought, and one of the questions I would have, CK, is that one of the advantages that small companies have is that we don't have the legacy IT systems that larger corporations have that are such a nightmare often to integrate and to get down to the individual level. And we can start with very inexpensive hardware today. Software is often available off the shelf through open source, and we can adapt and get into business very quickly. I was wondering whether you could give some examples of companies, entrepreneurial companies that you've seen that the audience in this room could relate to. And I know in one of the books, one of the articles you refer to Tutor Vista, which I think is a company in India, and I think it would be very interesting for them to hear about that.
Yeah, I think I have this. So Tutor Vista is a very interesting company. Somebody said, you can outsource everything, but not education. So somebody said, why not? And all of us know that kids have problems with tutoring of math and physics and chemistry, and also, surprisingly, English. And so this company started by saying, what if, using the laptop, I can tutor these kids from India? So what they collected was a large number of mostly housewives, highly educated people who decided to have a family, and they gave up their jobs and they were taking care of their children. So in their spare time, they taught them how to teach American kids some accent neutralization so that they speak the language that kids understand the curriculum here. And then they said, you can eat all you want for $99. So what they do is you can take as much time as you want with a tutor. You can decide which teacher you want. And they will schedule it. So all that is a scheduling algorithm which picks the teachers there, connects with the student here at the time the student wants, and teaches them math and physics and chemistry. And they find that these kids are doing phenomenally well. And it's called Tutor Vista. At the time we wrote the book, there are 600 teachers in India. And there are lots of people who have spare time and who have masters in physics or math or engineers. And there are lots of kids here who need help. So I asked the person who invented this company, how come you said $99 when typically in the US, 1 hour instruction would be $75, all that you can eat for $90. He said, I know American students, nobody's going to eat a lot. So he said, that's not a problem. Just before exams, we have peak loads, and as long as I can take care of it, it's okay. Just to give you an idea, Sequoia Capital invested in that company, and now Pearson, which is the world's largest publisher, bought a significant portion of that company, and they want to marry it with mastering physics, which is a software, or mastering math, which is a software which allows you to self-correct and get feedback. So you do a sum, or you do a problem set, and it not only goes and tells you you got it wrong, It also tells you where you got it wrong and what principles you should have used which you did not use. So it is an interesting software. You couple it with Tutor Vista, it can totally revolutionize the way we teach our kids. And this is an old business, at least 2,000-year-old business. Somebody found a way of changing because of the internet and because he was very good at building algorithms that allow for real-time scheduling of resources. This is the key, real-time scheduling. A kid can say, 2 hours from now, I want a physics teacher. And I am in grade 9 or 10 or whatever, and I'm at this level. And they can very rapidly figure out what your problems are, and then you can have this 1 hour or 2 hours. Now, it's a very small company.
Yeah. I thought it was an interesting example because it is a very small company. It is an entrepreneurial, N equals 1, total personalization, which is what CK talks about in the book. R equals G in the sense that the resources are tutors from all over the world.
Right. They don't own any of them. They're all contractors, but trained. So it's an ecosystem.
You know, just to get a sense of, this was a few years ago, of CK and his style. Back in the early 90s, he was a consultant to Philips. I remember Philips as this giant, rather plodding Dutch electronics company that many people really did think was perhaps going to go down the tubes. Had lots of competition from Asia, Japan, Taiwan, etc. And I just want to read you what in relation to Prahalad. The stunned Prahalad pulled with the top brass of Royal Philips Electronics in 1991 is legendary. The Dutch electronics conglomerate was losing market share fast in the consumer appliance field. They hired Prahalad for a weekend brainstorming session. He started the Saturday morning meeting by reading a small item he said he'd found in the Financial Times. Philips was heading into bankruptcy, the article speculated, and bankers wanted to know what management's game plan was. Forget what we're supposed to talk about, he said. This is a major crisis. You had better figure out what you're going to do about it. Perhaps you could comment on what happened.
Yeah, anyway, I worked with Philips for maybe over 3 years, helping them avoid bankruptcy. The problem in Philips, I realized fairly soon, I'd worked with them for a year before, was the dominant mindset was, we are Philips, we are indestructible, and Philips had some special shares, which was held very closely by the company. So it was almost impossible for someone to take over. It was called the GE law. When GE wanted to take over Philips in the 1920s or 30s, the Dutch created a new law by which Philips could not be taken over. So all managers were quite snug. And I had to break that mindset. So I just made up a Financial Times piece. And the reason why I picked Financial Times is Philips managers hated Financial Times, and likewise. And so anything bad said about the company, they would believe from Financial Times. So I just made up and I said, you're bankrupt, the bankers want to know what to do. So I broke them up. These were the top 50 people in the company worldwide. I broke them up and said, why don't we discuss this first? Why talk about strategy when you're going bankrupt? There's not much point. And they came back, and for the first time in the history of Europe, we created the largest layoff or restructuring. Because Europe used to take great pride in saying, we never will do such a thing. It's a purely American disease. And it saved. We cut 60,000 people in one shot, and that saved the company. And as you know, Philips is well and alive. The principle is very simple. If you want to change the mindset of people, deeply held beliefs are the dominant logic. You have to go to the core assumption that gives them that comfort and turn it around. And that's what I did. Of course, at the end of 2 days, when they all agreed, signed their names in blood, we will go and do it, then I told them, I'm sorry guys, I just made it up. And anyway, they're willing to kill me, but they all understand. Even today, they will tell you, but for that inflection point, Philips would have been history. So I think what the message is fairly simple. We have to come to terms with our own forgetting curve. In other words, everybody talks about the learning curve. My preoccupation is the forgetting curve. And we have to learn to forget what we know. And I think in order to learn something new. And that, I think, is the key idea. I think that became quite a celebrated event, because without that, the turnaround would not have happened. Once we got there, after that it was relatively easy.
I want to give CK a chance for a little bit of humility. He is indeed regarded, as I say, as the #1 thought leader in terms of business strategy today. Of course, he's consulting largely with very large corporations. But I want you to know he has had entrepreneurial experience himself. He had a startup project, which I don't believe was highly successful. And he was quoted when he was asked about it at one time, "I like to deal with very complex problems. That I really enjoy. I realize now there's a lot of blocking and tackling in running a startup." I just thought it might be interesting to hear from someone like yourself, so many entrepreneurs here, to elaborate a little bit on that experience in the world of dealing with major corporations to indeed dealing.
Yeah, I think Praja was a very interesting experience. I say generally, I don't have any regrets. Actually, one of them who worked with Praja as my colleague is here, so she can speak for herself. 3 things were good in Praja, and I can tell you 2 things that are not good in Praja. My most interesting experience was that we were at least 5 to 10 years ahead. For a tiny company, we had 9 or 10 patents filed. So it was not a bad company from that point of view. Today, when you see NASCAR, and you can ask, what does the driver see? We did that 10 years ago, not today. We created virtual cameras. Our goal was how to create a virtual camera that will look at, if you're a fly on Michael Jordan's head, what do you see? Because we looked at the cameras, we understood the dynamics of the field, and we created the map that will create a virtual camera. We did all that stuff. We also did March Madness. We also did football, where we demonstrated that you can go and say, I only want to see the touchdown, not anything else. We knew how to do that. We can only go and look at this player. We did all that stuff. We also figured out how we can do crowd control. Anybody who is not to be seen in a particular floor, if that person was there, the camera will follow and tag. So we did all this stuff. The good news is, it was intellectually very exciting. We had a very interesting problem, and that's a warning for all entrepreneurs. We had so many opportunities. It was very hard to focus on one. We probably focused on too many. And of course, being big thinkers, we wanted to have big change prematurely, but okay, that's one. We had an extraordinary team of very dedicated people. And I still believe we had people from 14 or 15 countries, I don't remember, but certainly not one country. And in fact, one of the pastimes for one of them was go and pin 65 people, but we have people from all over. And that was very exciting for me. We were ready to move in a big way. Unfortunately, the dot-com bubble burst. So if you walked on water, you could not raise money. And so I had a very clear choice. The choices were very simple. Totally get rid of everybody, hold on to the patents, and hope for a good time. That's a clear choice. Another thing is to be respectful of the people who did phenomenal amount of work. I tried to find a good home, even though I knew that people would say that was a failure. And after a lot of agonizing, I decided the interest of people who were so good was more important than my ego. And I said, let's sell it. We didn't make money. We lost money. I personally lost money. but I can still look back and say, I was proud of what we did. We tried to protect the interests of people. And Magda, you can contradict any of those?
No, and actually, because of what you've done, we were starting to look at how to transfer the project application to cell phones. And then afterwards, I started my company because I got interested in cell phones. So, it kind of worked out for everybody.
I think we across all know, particularly VC, is timing and luck is a large part of this thing, and across focus. You can be too early in terms of bringing a company to market, and you can be too late. Either one can be, unfortunately, lead to non-success.
But I think the interesting thing, the message I like to leave is not that sometimes you can fail. But that was my third company, not the first one. So we made some money in the other two. So it was not too bad. But the interesting thing for me is having tried it was more important for me than necessarily not having tried it. I didn't want to get old by saying, I wish I had tried it. My attitude is, hey, it didn't work, so what? So I didn't think the company was very successful, but if you read the book, I couldn't have written that book without project experience. So, hey, I got something out of it, so it's not too bad.
I've got a couple more questions, then I'm going to open up to the audience, because I'm sure there are a lot of questions in the audience. Just a couple of larger, sort of high-level questions, not related directly to his book, but issues that he has touched upon and commented in the past, CK. One is on leadership, and I found it quite amusing and interesting to listen to his views on leadership. He was talking about leadership, of course, entails hope, change, and the future. And he likened a form of leadership that's very different from what many Americans think of a leader. I think many Americans do think of General George Patton when they think of a great leader. And it's not to say that I think CK would deny that he was a great leader. He clearly was. But as a different style of leader is what CK believes will be more prominent in the future. And he likened that style of leadership to a sheepdog. And I thought it would be interesting for the audience if you elaborate.
Yeah, but I think for those of you who watch sheepdogs, and those of you who visited New Zealand, there are more sheep than people and lots of sheepdogs. The interesting thing about a sheepdog is you can only lead from behind. You have to be behind the sheep. You can bark a lot, don't bite. Never lose a sheep. And you must know where to go. So it's always from behind. So I always tell managers, think of yourself as a sheepdog. Don't think of yourself as a shepherd, because then you may feel you're Jesus Christ himself. So just think about a sheepdog, because sheepdog is always from behind. And I think very seldom we think that leadership is not what is the title that you give yourself. Leadership is the title that you get because those people whom you're leading think you are a leader. So in other words, Gandhi was a leader because millions of people voluntarily gave up everything. That's very different. And the reason why Patton is different for Gandhi for me, Patton was a great leader, but he had hierarchical power over his troops. Gandhi had no hierarchical power except morality and personal example. And to me, the new leaders will lead by example, by morality, and by force of what they do, not because you can impose your will on other people. And I think that's quite important for us to realize. So sheepdog is a good metaphor to use for me.
The other area that CK has obviously talked about a lot and has a lot of experience, personal experience in, and has advised some very successful companies in, is this whole idea of the democratization of capitalism, if you like, and the benefits of globalization for those at the bottom of the pyramid, those who are very poor. And there's examples such as ICICI in India, a bank that has been a phenomenal success. He can certainly talk about that. One of the things that he has alluded to recently is that there is the agenda for humanity as a whole. Globalization, inclusive growth, empowerment of people, sustainability of growth when really 1.5 billion people on this planet consume the vast majority of the resources. For example, in energy, I think the rest of it, 4.5 billion, only consume 10% of the energy. And the question is, those are the tremendous challenges going forward, how to manage all that. And I just would be sort of interested to ask you to make perhaps a comment on those comments of mine.
Yeah, I think it's in our interest in the West to make sure poor people in the rest of the world get a minimum standard of living, clean water, reasonable hygiene, reasonable education, and so on. And I believe that if we can think of 500 million kids in India alone to get a reasonable education and build reasonable skills, it can become the factory of the world, not manufacturing products. Think about what's happening all over Europe. It's an aging population. So if you want a plumber in Hamburg in 2020, whom are you going to get? So we have to look at the world as a source of talent. But you can't do it unless we focus as much of our attention on inclusive growth. And inclusive growth, by definition, will put new strains on sustainability. So the intersection of sustainable growth, inclusive growth, globalization, and connectivity, that is the intersection at which huge opportunities for innovation lie. And any one of us who can think through how to do that is going to make the world a much better place. Apart from becoming quite rich and successful, you will make the world a better place. So I believe there is a huge opportunity here, and I certainly think we can do a lot for the world. So.
Okay, let's get some questions from the audience, and I'm going to pass you the mic. Daniel?
CK, particularly because you have experience with Detroit, and I'm going to bring in telematics, and you talked about tires and sensors, and obviously I can extend that to more sensors in the car. So innovation is happening in that area. Innovation is happening in healthcare with that cardio solution. But the smokestacks exist. You mentioned standards. Can you comment on what you're seeing in the attitude of companies to break down, to stitch them?
I think, as you so well know, Anil, both in telecom, consumer electronics, and computing, standards have been a huge problem. Every company wants to push their own standards. Slowly, I think people are realizing, after losing a lot of money in VHS, in optical media, in CDs, DVDs, people are slowly saying, maybe getting to standards first is a good way to build the market. That doesn't mean it's going to happen. It's the same thing in computing. We still have multiple standards. Of course, Mac says it is PC compatible. Only when you try it, you know it is not always compatible. Sometimes it is compatible. So I think standards will emerge as a fundamental problem. And standard-setting bodies will emerge as critical sources of new business development. There are two ways to approach standards. One is government-mandated standards. Another is industry-mandated standards. And I think industry-mandated standards, I think, are going to be a lot more interesting. But the way that we are struggling with GSM and CDMA tells you that standards are important. And that's a big issue right here in Qualcomm, is it not? On CDMA versus GSM. And of course, depending on whom you talk to, one is winning. So I won't say who thinks CDMA is winning and who thinks GSM is winning.
Hi. I have a totally different kind of question. Because what you're talking about is, once people grow up, what do you suggest to change the way we do education? Because right now I think, my son has gone through the school and he had some problems, and so he didn't quite ever fit in. And so, people now ask me, how is your son doing? And I always say, well, he's a high school dropout, but he's doing really great, and I'm very proud of him because he's now a professional skateboarder. And I had to change my mindset about him doing that because, you know, my mindset was, you know, you go to school and then you go to college and then you do those things. How do you make kids today be like this through the education? How do we change the educational system to be more personalized so that each kid gets the education he or she needs because of the way he grasps things? You know, not all kids are the same, and they're forced into these rooms and the boxes, and you know, they all have to think the same way and learn the same way. And then you're saying, well, and then you have to undo everything so that you can be like this.
I think first let me tell you, Bill Gates, Larry Ellison, all of them are dropouts too.
Right.
So I think it doesn't mean. I think the reason I'm saying that I think is credentials, skills are very different. We assume credentials are the same thing as skills. They are very different. Second, motivation has very little to do with the type of degrees that you got. Actually, a lot of education can make you risk averse. So it's an interesting question. If he wants to go and build a skateboard business, because what is he going to do? He's going to learn more and more, and I think he's going to build a business at some stage. But unfortunately, he will also need to learn accounting. Unfortunately, he will also learn how to raise money, how to write a term sheet. TiE is a good place for him to get that without necessarily going to college.
Well, he's been here. He's been
So, the reason I'm saying that I think is, you're absolutely right. There is no cookie-cutter approach to success. I think people have to do what they're good at, but they better be world-class at what they do. That should be the goal. That's a very different statement.
But how do we teach them that in school? How do we?
No, we don't teach them in school. We teach the school to be conformist. And I can say as a professor, all teaching is production-oriented. How to improve efficiency of delivering stuff.
If I could just make a quick comment there. Probably because you're a great mum, you'll do everything that's needed. The book I suggest you read, or if any of you are familiar with The Naked Chef, it's a TV program in England. The guy is actually now he's got a charity that he's trying to get people in West Virginia, which has the highest obesity rate in the nation, to eat healthy food, cook healthy food, and so on. This guy is phenomenal. He was dyslexic, he dropped out of school, he's worth $65 million today.
Question which is almost in a different mode, but I really would like to find out how your mind handles it, and that is, of course, the banking industry. In fact, in the past year, we've seen General Motors, you know, which was all the legacy thinking was falling. General Motors, Chrysler falling. Now we've got, with the stimulus plan, all the power is gone to Goldman Sachs and all the financial industry. How would you apply this thinking to the financial industry, and how do you forecast the eventual demise of the financial industry? I mean, I know how ICICI goes through in India, but here we have a relatively small group with a lock on America, and something very difficult to solve. Therefore, how will your methods eventually cause or apply to the banking and the financial industry?
If there's a simple answer, I would not be sitting here. Probably I'll be in Washington. Now, seriously, I think the financial services industry is probably quite ripe for n equal to 1. I think if you really look at it, we are so stuck in legacy. If you have 6 accounts, we can't even get a single statement looking at what your net worth is. And it's in the same bank. If I go to an ATM and I put my card, it wants to say English or Spanish. I say, I put the same card. Why don't you know who I am? Every time I say English. And then they want to ask whether you want a mortgage. I already have one with you. In other words, there is no attempt at all to understand individuals, to understand how to provide unique service, and the ATM group, and the card group, and the banking group are not integrated inside. So there is a huge opportunity for change. And I think they will be driven into making that change. Otherwise, you're going to find new competitors coming and taking over the market share. To give you an idea, ICICI is collecting totally PC-based banking in Canada. They're collecting 2,000 to 3,000 new customers because their costs are so low. They can reduce their cost to a point where they give 1% more interest. So Canadians are saying, hey, this looks like a good deal to me. No advertising, no brick and mortar, no storefront, all PC-based. And who are these? These are the very well-educated people. So there is going to be competition, and it can be cross-border competition. So it's a matter of time.
Apparently we have to be out of this room by 9 o'clock. It's not an issue with TiE so much.
We can end at 9, but we have a few minutes after.
Oh, we have a few minutes left. Okay, one more question.
I wanted to talk about leadership. You mentioned Gandhi and Patton. Who are the other people who have inspired you as good leaders?
Nelson Mandela. Just imagine, after apartheid, the country could have gone up in smoke and blood. He had the statesmanship courage to say, let's forget the past and let's build a new Africa. It's an extraordinary stroke of statesmanship and morality, because vengeance would not have solved the problem. And I think we need more people like that. And I think Mother Teresa, for example. And somehow these are not our role models. And I think we should look at these people. Extraordinary good that you can do. Mother Teresa does not start with a lot of investment. She starts with an idea. She starts with herself. And Nelson Mandela does not start with a station. He starts with himself. And I think, so to me, leadership is about people who can be lonely thinkers, non-conformists, lonely thinkers. And there is an old Jain saying that if you are not educated, you can't help the uneducated. If you're sick yourself, you can't help the sick. If you're not rich, you cannot help the poor. So the first investment leaders have to make is in themselves and in self-development and self-awareness. After that, you can help everybody else. So a lot of times when we think about leadership, we focus on what we can do to others. We never focus on ourselves and self-development as the basis for helping others.
Thank you. With that, we will end our session. I hope you found it very useful. But before I let our speakers, our illustrious keynote speaker go, I'd like to give a token of our I've done it without you. Thank you very much. I wanted to close out by saying two things. One, you might have noticed that there is a brightly colored sheet of paper at the center of the table. That represents our next event. This is, and a lot of what Professor Prahalad mentioned may get included in this. We have a panel of experts coming to talk about smart devices and the connected planet. It's a broad topic. Multiple smokestacks that are being connected and very fast. And there are some companies who are playing in it, and they are represented here. There are obviously many more companies that can be invited to speak, and we'll find the opportunity. I hope you'll come back. And last thing, somebody might have dropped a hotel key outside. I know most of the people here are local, but we found a hotel key. So if you are missing a Sheraton key, we have something here. Thank you again, and please.